17 at 4.5% interest. So what's at stake by not paying for Lowe's, the obligations under the agreement, not paying by July 1st, potentially is, we calculated it at an additional $1.2 million in interest above and beyond the $10.1 million by the time you roll back to 3%, bring that forward, and then amortize at 4.5%. And so that's a good reason to bring this issue to your attention and have a discussion on where we think we should be headed with the projects that are part of the $12 million bond. We have had several conversations, Dean and I have had several conversations with our bond financial advisors and attorney consultants. Preliminarily, and this would be finalized before your next meeting in June, but preliminarily, because of the interest charges associated with what I just described with the Lowe's agreement, we think we should change our approach to what's included in that $12 million bond to paying off Lowe's $10 million obligation as well as $2 million towards the reservoir that's under bid and soon to be under construction. And that would mean that the West Side Interceptor, the water plant design, Oak Street, Airway Road, and a part of the 5th Street Reservoir would need to be done out of existing cash within the Urban Renewal District and future cash flow. But obviously we believe it's wise to juggle those projects on the back end to avoid that over $1 million in additional costs. Now, beyond that, we also learned from the Lynn County Assessor's Office, an appraiser called and indicated that Lowe's is appealing their assessed value, and this has implications to the tax flow that comes from the Urban Renewal District. Lowe's is appealing, wanting a value set at $43,790,000. That's for land, building, and equipment. The assessors has the Lynn County Board of Property Tax Appeals established a value of $77,520,540, and all that can be compared to the original projections that were done way back in 2005 at over $107 million. So you see quite a disparity between the appeal, what the appraiser has the value at, and what Lowe's is, what the projections were by the city's consultant back in 2005 that were also frankly shared with Lowe's, and in my opinion were part of the basis for the incentive package negotiations that took place way back when. So Dean and I had a conference call. We were referred to Brad Hincher. He is the head of the real estate incentives. He's a real estate incentives managers for Lowe. They do this nationwide. I think they have 13 plus different distribution centers, and we talked through the implications of the appeal to the tax that we need on our end to pay for the debt service associated with the incentives. Mr. Hincher wanted to spend more time talking about their appeal that they have before the tax court coming up, but we tried to focus our time and energy on the implications of the appeal if it's successful to our cash flow. Now, having said that all this is in the works, we're also having conversations with a financial advisor to confirm that the $12 million bond is still viable. We think it is at this point, but we just need to confirm that the $12 million bond issue underway is still viable and can work for all of us under any of the scenarios that come out of an appeal process. The next steps that we're looking for from the City Council is just a confirmation that we're on the right track in terms of how we're looking at juggling the projects to avoid that interest charge, and then also to talk about Lowe's letter that's later in the packet. If you think we're on the right track, then we would obviously refine some of the information in this packet and hopefully have a little bit more detail for you at the next meeting on June 12th. So with that, Mayor, I'm going to stop for a minute and see if there are questions before we go back to 3 or 4 pages from the end is the draft letter to Lowe's. And I could explain for the viewing audience that besides the original 2005 economic development agreement between the City of Lowe's or the city and Lowe's, there's also a copy of the Oregon Tax Court appeal that Lowe's has filed. And that has both the land and building on one sheet, and on the other sheet is the personal property, which is the equipment. So I'll pause, take a breath, and see if council has questions at this point.
Okay, just a reminder for council, if you're going to speak, please have your mic on so that the camera picks up and the audience can hear also. Thank you.
John, I guess my first question would be is, on the tax appeal process, have you had dialogue with the assessor and the commissioners about their thoughts about how, if they feel that's a good number?
Yeah, good question. We've had numerous email exchanges. Dean and I had a conference call with the Lynn County assessor, the industrial appraiser, and the assistant assessor. So we've had really good discussions. They feel very confident in the $77 million number. They think it's a fair number, and they do not have they think they will represent their interests very well before the tax magistrate in Salem. They made it very clear to us that this whole process of tax appeals is a function of county government and not city government, and while they would hope for our support in the forms of information they will use to build their case, they're not looking for direction from the City of Lebanon as much as assistance from Dean and staff in providing numbers, or Trey in providing some legal feedback as well.
What's the time frame for that appeal?
Originally, Gene Johnson, the appraiser we've been working with, indicated there was a hearing date set in Salem for July. At our last discussion, Dean, correct me if I'm wrong, but he said he thought it would maybe be moved back into the fall, into a September timeframe.
October.
Does the county have any significant experience with the tax court in terms of precedents and how in other words, have they had a number of cases where their confidence level seems to be borne out?
Just from the way they assume, or they answered the question on their confidence and their number, I assume they have, but I can't tell you, Barry, specifically. No.
Okay.
The 4 pages from the back, then, is a letter to Brad Hincher, and he's the real estate incentives manager for Lowe's. And at the end of our conversation, I asked for consideration of relief from some of the terms in the agreement, given what was happening with the assessed value projections compared to where we're at today at $77 million, and what could happen if Lowe's is successful in appeal to almost $44 million. And he committed to receiving a letter and then sharing that letter with the appropriate people in Lowe's. So the letter is draft. It's dated May 23rd. I won't read all the way through it, but it summarizes our understanding of what's in the agreement for Lebanon's obligation, which is $10.1 million. We restate our concern on the varying the big differences between the assessed value at both the projection, the current, and the appeal rates. We restate as strong as we can that the implication for us is the ability to make the debt service associated with the incentives that were part of the agreement. And then we ask for relief in 3 different areas. One of the areas is to extend that July 1st payment date out into September, so we have time to adjust the bonds to make sure the money's there to provide for the payment. The second item is just a general request that they reduce the $10.1 million payment, and I put that in because of the difference, frankly, between the projections that the incentives were based off of to where we are today at $77 million. And then the third on page 2 of the letter is the asking them to withdraw the appeal that's before the Oregon tax court. And the argument there obviously is the assessed value currently is $77 million, and that's I think it's more than 35% less than what the $107 million projection that was used to help base the incentives off of. And so that would go in also with an acknowledgement of, frankly, how important Lowe's contributions to the community from what they do for the community as well as economic development has been for us. And attached to that letter is and this is a document that dates back to 2005, but it is the projected Lowe's tax increment revenues and debt service, and that's where you can see reference to the $107 million in incremental assessed value. There's an arrow pointing down to it, and then also you can look at the debt service that was associated with Lowe's. So I would answer questions you may have on this one as well. And obviously, we're looking for a consensus or a nod of the head that it's over my signature at this point. More may come on this later, but I certainly wanted to have council support before this letter goes back and they start to consider the requests.
Well, I think the content of the letter is appropriate, and I certainly support that, John. A question related to research we've done on the incentive agreement from the city. Is this, should we do what is asked of us by Lowe's? Does that complete the agreement?
Our understanding from both the staff review as well as Dean and my conversation with Mr. Hincher is that this would complete our obligations to Lowe's under the agreement.
Would what we're asking in 1, 2, and 3, would that void or violate any part of the agreement that would then come back to haunt us, or?
I don't think so. I mean, the worst that can happen is that they don't look too fondly on any or all of the suggestions, but we are asking, given the circumstances, for their relief. Trey may want to jump in as well.
Yeah, I mean, anything that they agree to doesn't violate the contract. I mean, we'd make sure that they had their agreement.
I feel like we're on the right track with this, that I think the thing that's going to shock the public will be the numbers, but the numbers have always been the numbers. These aren't new numbers, and this is nothing that's changed since 2005. But to be fiscally and financially responsible and avoid a potential $1.2 to $1.4 million hit, that I think we're on the right track with that, obviously.
Yeah, I think that you and the staff have done a good job on this, and I agree. The 1.2 million to hold it off the way we were going to proceed, I don't think is prudent at this point. So I'm in agreement with this. I think this looks pretty good.
We're just talking about a huge discrepancy, though, in that assessed value. I mean,
Yeah.
that's, maybe my math, Barry, check me on my math, but I'm thinking like 65% difference there, the
Down to
107
to
the 107 to
million.
43.
Yeah, it's in that neighborhood.
And that's, I know you can't plan around that, but that's enormous, and then hopefully that's taken into consideration.
John, from your understanding of the history, the 10 million, the 10.1 million, with the exception of the 2% interest, the remaining 9.3 million or thereabouts was a known number. Those are kind of hard numbers back in 2005. So none of this is, like Jason pointed out, none of these numbers have really changed since 2005 with the exception of the accruing interest. I wasn't involved back at that stage in the game with the numbers, but my question would be, what was the plan at that point? We had a July 13 date then. What was the basic plan for how we're going to meet that obligation then? Did we have something in mind, or did we just?
Yeah, well, let me answer. There are two questions there. One is, I've reviewed material over a 6-month period where the terms were negotiated back and forth, reports made to council, considered in open session. So these aren't new numbers, as you say. These are obligations that were known back then. And the reason that they may appear new to some people is that it's 8 years later. It was April of 2005, and here we are May of 2013. The reason, in my opinion, and I think staff would confirm it as well, the reason that you had the lag time in the payment was so that we could allow Lowe's to work through another incentive they were receiving, which was the enterprise zone property tax abatement, so they didn't have to pay property taxes under that incentive for the first 4 years after they came up to speed. And that it was also for the urban renewal district assessed value base to grow to a volume where either the cash or the debt service from property tax growth could pay for this down the road incentive. So it was the way you structure it when you don't have the cash in hand.
No, I understand that part. My question was the expectation that the URD growth in cash flow would accommodate the lump sum payment in 2013 at that stage in the game? Or were we planning always on taking care of this with a bond issue?
Well, I think that's answered just, Barry, through on Table 1. If you look at, there's the state loan associated with the infrastructure, and that was about $4 to $5 million in loan value. That's at $264,000. And the city loan reimbursement for Lowe's at $1.2 million that comes in, that is obviously debt service. So I think they assumed way back when that they would do a bond and then service debt.
Okay, that was really the answer to my question. We did expect to do this with debt service.
That's how I remember it, Barry.
Okay. So we're really not, again, like Jason said, the numbers really aren't changing, nor is the plan of dealing with it changing. Some of the
Assumptions.
some of the assumptions have changed because of the economic climate, but we're simply responding to reality now, not
Pre-2008.
But the big change
We're not
is,
seeing a lack of a plan that just didn't happen.
the big change is them wanting a reduction in their taxes.
Yeah.
That's the
Yes.
And there was discussion about the bond in 2013 when they discussed this at the city council meeting in 2005.
Okay, well, that's the answer to my question.
Any other questions?
You know, and I'm not recalling exactly what the agreement was, but John, in your research, or Trey, in the contractual language, in regards to the wetlands purchase and the mitigation, because it's my understanding from having some discussions with Lowe's personnel that wetlands property is not needed by Lowe's currently. So what happens to that property?
Well, that was the agreement. It was that Lowe's would use that property to meet their mitigation requirements.
Yes.
DSL requirements on their own site, and then once those were met, they would convey that property to the city, plus they would receive $2 million for that property. But the ownership and the responsibility in the future, as I understand the agreement, and Ron's had some work on this as well as Trey, is that was part of the original agreement.
Yeah, I think that's true. So what's the potential for the city in terms of, I mean, that's not property that's going to be deeded back to us, correct?
It is already city property. It's conveyed once that Lowe's meets the obligations to mitigate wetland impacts, and it will be an ongoing, very small maintenance requirement for the city to look after for years into the future. I very much doubt it will be developed because it's a wetland site.
Right. I think the requirements are that it needs to remain wetlands as part of the mitigation, and maybe Ron could address that further.
Yeah. It is to remain wetlands. We met with actually DSL and a representative of Lowe's yesterday to go through the wetlands. We walked it, determined what the process for the city was going to be as far as maintenance, and it's pretty minor. Basically maintaining the weir boards for the structure to keep it wet during the spring, and a few little rock check dams that, should they fail, we'd have to go in and fix. But beyond that, there are no maintenance requirements. There's no mowing. We're not responsible for plant survivability. That's all been taken care of through Lowe's. So It's just a 113-acre wetland that we've got to make sure the weir boards are on at this point, unless, I mean, obviously, I imagine groups will want to use it for viewing and whatnot, and that'd be up to the city council and DSL to determine if that's a possibility.
John, the 3 points in your letter, the 3 requests, did you have conversation with Mr. Hincher about these kinds of things in your phone conversation? So will these be completely out of the blue to them, or that any sense of how they may respond to these?
The commitment that we received from Mr. Hincher was to take it up the corporate ladder to the people that he works for. We talked specifically about the implications of the July 1st date and our preference for a September 1st date. We talked about relief from the debt, and from their perspective, what we heard was Lowe's has met our obligations. It's not only the site, but it's also what we did for the local economy way back when. He did a good job of representing the corporate's interests and shareholders' interests. And so we did talk about 1, we talked about 2, and the third one was withholding or withdrawing the tax appeal. Yeah, that shouldn't surprise him either. We were talking at each other. I was talking from the perspective of withdraw your appeal, and he was talking from the perspective of think of all the good things we do, support us in our appeal.
Of course.
John, can you speak to the impact of, let's play the what-if game, what if, given what happened over in Corvallis with HP and their appeal, what if this appeal is granted? Has the impact been looked at yet, and what can you tell us about what that potential impact?
We are still, we're still talking with our Eco Northwest, the financial consultant that also has been a sub-consultant to the city's primary consultant on the urban renewal district. So we're talking to people who run numbers for a living, and that's part of what we want to update you on. We've had a phone conversation, actually a conference call this morning, and it appears right now that, and that's why it's in the staff report, that under a worst-case scenario, we could still issue those bonds, meet this payment obligation, and move forward into the future. It would change the project mix and the timing and some other costs that the district has. We would have more in terms of actual numbers for you at the June meeting.
Okay.
I don't want to put out a number right
Sure,
now
no, I
that
understand.
we'd have to backpedal from.
Thank you.
So that information, or the time frame, I guess, for the current projects that we have, on the books, really, is it your understanding, Ron, the possibility that those would be pushed back, or can we move forward at a slower pace?
Well, we can move forward at a slower pace on a couple of them. The ones that are going to be critical are the ones that we're under contract with right now, which the only one right now is the water reservoir. And I think we've looked at that and determined that based on $2 million from the bond and then the cash along with that's a possibility. And then the other one would be the one we're under contract with is the West Side Interceptor. There was $1 million going to that, and I think based on the numbers that Dean and John and I have looked at, that those 2 projects would be fine. And then the impacts from there, like John said, I mean, we kind of need to wait and see how Lowe's, and whether they're successful on the appeal, where we go from the rest of it.
So we're not going to have a real answer until they've had their appeal process or agreed to our ask via the letter.
They said they could turn around a response on our requests fairly quickly. And so we'll have an answer, I think, on that within a month's time, probably. If we come back and with revised financial information from our financial consultant, it shows that we can, in fact, meet the obligations under all of the scenarios, then we would want to continue to save on that $1.1 million hit that would come after July 1st. It only gets worse.
Yes.
There are no issue, when will the $12 million bond issue actually get funded? What's the schedule there?
Well, it was supposed to go out, Dean, correct me, but mid-June, and right now we're 3rd of June.
3rd of July.
And
It's supposed to be, well, okay, it's not, there's no light, but it's on. No light, but it's on. The bond as it's set up now is supposed to be costed, or they'll get their cost the middle of July, with the bond being issued the 3rd of, middle of June, but the bond's issued on the 3rd of July. So we wouldn't have the money in hand until the 3rd of July to be able to pay this.
Okay, so we would miss our date. Now, clarify for me, because I haven't gone back and read the agreement, but the concept of amortizing into the future, can you explain what that, I mean, I understand the concept of amortization, but I'm not sure how that pertains to paying this off.
so if we miss a July 1st date because it didn't get extended, and again, we wouldn't want to do that, we would want to make some arrangement for interim financing if necessary to save on that over $1.2 million in interest costs. But if we miss that date, then that $7 million plus $800,000 in interest gets increased another almost $500,000 because the interest rate going back 5.7 years now is 3% versus 2%. That rolls forward to July 1st, and then there is that principal amount of, say, $8.3 million that gets carved up into a 5-year amortization schedule at 4.5% interest. And
Meaning
so,
that if we paid everything, including the 1% penalty, up to July 3, let's say, we still have an obligation for that 4% going forward? So if we can pay it off and be done with that 4%. at that-
Exactly.
It's just if we run longer, then it goes to 4.
then it triggers the
That's-
3% and the 4.5%.
That's my question. I think I understand.
You know, the other thing I want to emphasize for the viewing audience, listening audience especially, is that we're talking about an incentive package for Lowe's that you can see from the table had, under the assumptions that were there, if you look at that bottom line, balance Lowe's maximum revenues less Lowe's debt service, you can see it grows over the years to almost $7 million. And I just have to say that, remember, it's not just the Lowe's incentive packages that we wanted to fund with those property taxes. It is that share, or their share, or the property share of the reservoir, the street improvements, the West Side Interceptor. So I don't think we want to be phrasing this as, oh, Lowe's just needs to meet their commitment to the incentives with property tax. That still needs infrastructure-wide improvements to occur for the benefit of everyone, including Lowe's, and that's why that line was at the bottom of these projections. And Dean and I said that when we talked with Mr. Hincher on the phone, but I wanted to get it on YouTube in case they look at it while they consider our request.
John, one more thing on the tax appeal. Is that an arbitrary yes/no from the state?
It's a good question. We asked that question too, and it is not. The tax magistrate, according to the county, has the ability to move within that range.
Great.
Between the Lowe's number and the county number, they can negotiate within that space?
Yeah, I don't know, it's a
understand.
negotiation as much as the magistrate makes a ruling based on the cases that both of them put forward. But it isn't a, I asked the question because in labor agreements, it's kind of, and oftentimes it's an either-or, and that isn't the case.
No binding
It's my understanding, at least reading what I have read about the HP appeal, was the magistrate can set it anywhere they want within that range.
Well, what'll happen is that both sides will come in and they'll have their experts. And their experts will lay out the assessed value based on the evidence and their research and all that kind of stuff. And then like a judge or any judge, the judge weighs the credibility of the witnesses, the credibility of the evidence, looks at the law as what he's required to look at for assessed value, and then sets the value. He could do it at exactly what the county says it is and adopt their findings. He could do it exactly as Lowe's says and adopt their experts and their findings, or he can say, you know what, I'm somewhere in the middle.
Any other questions?
Weren't we at, I'm kind of foggy on this, but weren't we supposed to have a payment reduced, not the full amount here coming up, instead of not having to go for the 10 million?
You know, maybe you're thinking, Bob, of the bond issue had $4 million as a progress payment.
Yeah.
But what we're suggesting is, if that's the only payment that's made, then that will trigger the higher interest being backdated as well as the amortization into the future. So we're suggesting that that not be
We don't
pursued.
want that, then.
We want to pay it off and
Yeah, I
avoid
think
those
so.
charges.
Yeah.
So, John, are you looking for a consensus on the
I
letter?
think so. You know, it's kind of a speak now, or this is a track that we're going to go down, and we'll send this letter and hopefully have some updated information for you at the June meeting.
Well, I appreciate the work you've done on it, and I support it.
Yeah, I would support as well, Paul.
I think we're on the right track.
Okay. Looks like we have a
Get it taken
unanimous
care of all
consensus.
at once.
And thank you for your work on this,
Yeah.
both you guys, and Ron, too. Anything else?
None from staff.
Okay. Okay, any items from council? Okay, and seeing none. Public comments, we'll have a last opportunity for citizens to comment. Any citizens?
Yeah, let me fill this out really fast. Oh, this is louder. Guess I haven't been here for a while.
We've changed things.
These are turbo mics.
So, first out,
State your name, please.
Wyatt King from 224 2nd Street, Lebanon, Oregon. And the first thing I have to say is that I know the current regime was not in charge when this was agreed upon, but just crunching the numbers from what I was able to print offline, it sounds like we paid them a lot of money to come here, as well as gave them some tax breaks, and they're only required by their contract to be here for 5 years. Now, was it 3 years or 4 years that we gave them tax exempt status? Because it
I think it was
says
4.
3 in the agreement, but it was you said 4 earlier.
Yeah, and you could touch base with Dean after the meeting and get a specific reading of that. My understanding was property tax abatement, enterprise zone abatements are for 3-year period, but then you have the option to apply for additional years, and they did apply for a 4th year, and so that's where my statement came from.
Okay, so if they did get the 4 years, and after their 5 years, they cut and run because they're legally allowed to do so, aren't we in the hole a lot? Like, that's just one comment there. And then the other thing, reading through the agreement, on section 7.1.3, it says that Lowe's has to maintain, well, it doesn't say maintain, actually. It says Lowe's has to reach a workforce of 400 people. Now, it doesn't say if that's an average, so it would take into account seasonal, if it's supposed to be all the time thing. It doesn't say if they have to reach it once and then they're good by the contract, but it is $1 million, like $1.2 million that they would have to pay us if they were in violation of that. Is that something we can pursue?
The paperwork that I've seen in looking through the file has indicated to me that they've met all of the employment benchmarks, as well as there's a capital investment benchmark of $95 million that you probably saw when you read through the agreement. They've met all of those benchmarks, and what are commonly referred to as clawback agreements, where If they don't meet their obligations, they would have to pay Lebanon back. I think that time period has transpired and that they met the employment level as well as the capital investment levels called for in the agreement. That's my analysis.
Well, thank you. And then I guess my last comment would be to say that, excuse me, maybe in the letter we could recommend or suggest amending the contract to be 10 years instead of 5. That way, with these lower tax rates, we're not just completely hurt if they cut and run as soon as they can.
Thanks, Wyatt.
Thank you,
I'd
Wyatt.
probably only point out that even if they cut and run, the property stays there and continues to accrue property taxes that go against the value of the property. So the thing that we would lose if they cut and run would be the employment impact to the
Yeah.
community. We're not going to lose the property tax regardless.
That's a good point.
Thank you, White. Anyone else for comments? Okay. Seeing none, we'll adjourn the meeting.